Awesome. Okay. All right, so today we're going to talk about one of my favorite destinations in the world, Brazil. I have a kind of a special relationship with this country. It's kind of where I first started guiding. I mean, I had been guiding in Florida and had guided a little bit in Ecuador before I went to Brazil, but Brazil was really where I really learned how to guide at a place called Cristalino Lodge in the Amazon rainforest. And during my time there, um, I also got to visit the Pantanal. At the time, they didn't know jaguars were easy to see. This was before that. And I also spent 24 days exploring the Atlantic rainforest, and I had a whole misadventure in Chapada de Guimaraes. And actually, when I went there about 10 to 12 years later with a tour group from Naturalist Journeys, the owner of the lodge actually remembered me. So I thought that was pretty cool. So
Carlos, this is Carrie. I'm sorry to interrupt, but someone seems to have your recording on elsewhere, and so it's echoing. Can you please mute everyone except yourself? That's under the participants tab.
better?
Yes, the echo went away. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so here's a jaguar from one of our tours taken from Porto Jofre. And yes, jaguars are now quite easy to see in the Pantanal. It probably might make it one of the easiest big cats to see really well. So let's begin our journey. It's 3 parts. We'll do the Pantanal in the middle, but we'll also explore 2 other very important regions within Brazil that we sort of sample on our tour. One being the Atlantic rainforest, and the other being the Cerrado, which I kind of like to call the forgotten grasslands of Brazil. Both equally beautiful in their own way, both very important. So let's dive right in. There we go. So the pre-tour begins in Sao Paulo. So we fly into Sao Paulo and we have the option of birding in an urban park not far from our hotel. Sao Paulo is a huge megalopolis, but great sort of springing board to explore other parts of Brazil. Brazil being one of the, it occupies 2/3 of South America, a massive country. A lot of local bird watchers never really leave Brazil. It is a world unto itself in a lot of ways. So starting in Sao Paulo, we visit a local park and we get to see our first toco toucans and blonde crested woodpeckers. But the following day, we start making our drive to a very special park, Itatiaia National Park, which is on the border between the states of Rio de Janeiro and Minas Gerais. The Atlantic rainforest it is an amazingly beautiful rainforest. So basically the coast of Brazil, all the way from Iguazu waterfall through the state of Bahia, which, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of miles of coastline, was basically blanketed with this lush tropical rainforest pre-European colonization. Unfortunately, when the Portuguese came, and then following with a whole melting pot of immigrants, from Germany, Sweden, Finland, Italy. Brazil has the largest diaspora of Portuguese, Italian, and I believe even Spanish and also Japanese immigrants. It experienced massive immigration. Unfortunately, for the Atlantic rainforest, they wanted to put the land to work, and they deforested enormous amounts of land. And so now only about 10% of that Atlantic rainforest is left. The Atlantic rainforest, they're trying to slowly seed corridors to sort of connect the fragments, because it really is a critical part of basically South America's forested regions. It has over 200 endemic bird species. Over 900 bird species utilize that forest in some way. And in my opinion, it has one of the most colorful assortments of birds anywhere in the world, such as this. We have a azure-shouldered tanager on the left, and on the right, we have a saffron toucanet, both taken in Itatiaia National Park, both endemic to this rainforest. And yet another Atlantic rainforest specialty, and a favorite for many, is the green-headed tanager. There's no shortage of beautiful, unique, and endemic tanagers to the Atlantic rainforest. If you've been to Central America, if you've been to the Andes and have seen many of those beautiful, colorful birds, going to the Atlantic rainforest of Brazil is like going to a whole new world of different tanagers and different hummingbirds and different everything. It's really, really amazing. And so we arrive at Itatiaia National Park. It's actually Brazil's oldest national park. It was established in 1973. Hotel do Ipê is kind of a funny little place. It looks like, the buildings look like Swiss chalets. It's not unusual in Brazil, especially in southern Brazil, for there to be a lot of Swiss and German influence in the architecture. In fact, not far from Itatiaia and Hotel do Ipê, there's a city called Campos de Jordão, which is entirely made of Swiss architecture. It's actually really, really cool. So we stay at Hotel do Ipê, and we're going to be right in the heart of the Atlantic rainforest. And from there, we basically walk and explore. Here you see an image of that rainforest environment, a lot of palms, a lot of vines, lianas, orchids. So plenty of vegetation and plenty of birds. The feeders are just alive with birds all the time, and we'll get back to that later. On one day, we go a little higher and we explore the Agulhas Negras Road. So the Agulhas Negras Road is a high elevation road by Brazilian standards. And it basically starts off at this lovely little parking area in this sort of rainforest environment. They have really, really good pão de queijo at the bakery there, and usually we partake of the pão de queijo there. So pão de queijo is it's made of cassava flour, and it's made with local cheese, originally from Minas Gerais, which is the miners. Minas Gerais means the general mines, and so the wives would make this bread to basically have a hearty breakfast meal for the miners. And so it's become a big Brazilian tradition all over now, and you get to try it right at the start of the tour at the Agulhas Negras Road. And so we go through the rainforest, beautiful cloud forest. We get our first experience seeing green-headed tanager, brassy-breasted tanager, diadem tanager, just just a rainbow of different colors. There's Pseudoquat trogon, ant thrushes, new warblers, really, really amazing. And then it starts to dry out a bit, and then it starts going through Araucaria, or also called monkey puzzle trees. So Araucarias they're distant related to pine trees, but of the southern hemisphere. So there are no native pine trees in the southern hemisphere, I believe, other than these. So, but in the southern hemisphere, they have Araucarias, and so this basically is a relic of sort of when there were two main continents, Brazil being formerly part of Gondwana. So it's a relict vegetation type, relict forest, and there we look for the Araucaria tit spinetail, which specializes on feeding in those trees. And then we go on a little bit further and you reach this really rocky area with this really dramatic mountain scenery, which you don't usually think of as Brazil, and it's cold up there. And it's not really Paramo in the Andean sense. It's not really high enough, but it is above tree line. It is pretty cool to see. And we do go up there and have a nice picnic lunch and look for greater pampa finch up there. So the feeders, we spend a lot of time at the feeders at Hotel do Ipé, offer incredible opportunities for photography. And here are 3 samples of birds taken at those feeders. It's magpie tanager. We have a white-throated hummingbird and a dusky-legged guan. Just if you love bird photography or just like getting really close to birds, this is a great experience for you. And this is our group after their picnic lunch above tree line at the Agulhas Negras Road. I think they had just seen the greater pampa finch and they were happy to have seen it. So next up, we're going to go to the meat of the tour. We're going to go to the Pantanal. So the Pantanal is highlighted here in this neon green yellowish color. It's pretty much in the geographic center of Brazil, and it's the world's largest wetland, and it forms via the drainage of the Paraná River. And it's mostly in Brazil, but Bolivia does have some pieces of it, but mostly in Brazil. And we visit the northern half up here in the southern part of Mato Grosso. So the Pantanal isn't just like the Everglades of Florida. It isn't just a wetland. It's a mosaic of habitats. And we stay at various lodges on our tour to sort of transect those various habitats. So when we go to Posada Piuval, which is the lodge featured here, a working cattle ranch, no less, Posada Piuval features seasonally dry forest. It's much drier than areas further south. And so the birds here are slightly different than the ones that you would see further south. So we see things here like greater rhea, red-legged seriema. We see white-fronted woodpecker, great rufous woodpecker.
I'm still here. It's on mute, but it's not muting. Okay.
Carlos, please mute all.
Yeah.
Please mute. Yeah. Okay. Oh, this meeting is being recorded. Leave meeting. Continue. Okay.
Just a second.
I still am not. It's
all right. And so Posada Piuval features all these different birds that are unique, sort of unique for the Transpantaneira Highway. And it's actually dry enough that it actually stays open all year round, which isn't what happens further south. So Pousada Pival, seasonally dry forest. As we go south, we're going to go to South Wild Pantanal. We get to see gallery forest with a different set of birds, different set of mammals. And then finally, we finish after crossing through wetlands that look very much like the Everglades on steroids. We reach Porto Jofre, and Porto Jofre, in that area, we look for jaguars. Also a very good place to see giant anteater. I mean, sorry, not giant anteater, giant otter. Giant anteaters in Pousada Pival. Just a second here, it takes a little while to sometimes shift. So I'm going to play a little video. This is taken from South Wild Pantanal, just for you to get sort of a little bit of the ambiance of the Pantanal. This was taken in the morning at South Wild, and it features a herd of capybara, and you could hear yellow chevron parakeets chattering in the background. One thing about the Pantanal in the early mornings, there's a big rush of activity as all the herons and egrets, storks start commuting to their feeding areas. All the parrots also commute. There's just a big wave of activity. And I've actually, before breakfast, had 110, 120 species seen. Because the thing with the Pantanal is it's such a amazingly productive ecosystem that almost all bird species and many of the mammal species there are actually very common. And so you get a lot of repeat views of things. You get to, if one, if something flies off, you can usually find another. And it's really cool to be in an ecosystem that rich. And so let's take a look at some of the waders that we will be seeing. Jabiru is pretty likely. It's the largest stork in South America, here on the far right with that gular pouch. They are absolutely massive. They're, I believe, over 5 feet tall, actually. A wood stork if a wood stork stands next to one, the wood stork looks tiny. Let's put it that way. They need extremely productive wetlands to thrive and to breed, because they literally have to feed their young several pounds of fish per day. And this isn't a very common situation. So, if you've seen them in Belize, you've seen them in Costa Rica, usually you see 1 or 2 small numbers. But in the Pantanal of Brazil, you see them in big numbers. They really are thriving there because there's just so much food. The white bird at the bottom is a capped heron. It's a relative of the night heron, a very elegant bird, very beautiful. And of course, many people struggle to see sunbittern in Costa Rica or in several of our other South America or Central America tours. If you really have your heart set on seeing a sunbittern, which it's a gorgeous bird when it opens its wings, it's marvelous, and when it has its wings closed, it's still marvelous. Go to the Pantanal, where they're literally, you could see they're literally in every pond. There must be one of them. They're just so common there. Again, so many birds. American pygmy kingfisher here, a red-legged Seriema, distant relative of the ancient terror birds of South America. If anyone studies prehistoric animals at all, they know South America used to be dominated by these very large meat-eating birds, and most of them have gone extinct, but the red-legged CREM is part of that lineage, and it behaves a lot like a secretary bird. It, very similar niche, very interesting bird, very raucous calls. And then finally, agami heron, which is you can see at South Wild Pantanal in the gallery forest now. Very rare, very arguably probably the most beautiful heron in the world and I actually probably would agree with that. It is a very stunning one. Another bird we can see in the Pantanal. And just to get some songbirds in here, because there are a lot of songbirds, and there are actually our feeders as well. Red-crested cardinal and saffron finch, both actually tanagers. If you're with me, you will quickly learn or be confused by things that are tanagers and aren't tanagers. But saffron finch and red-crested cardinal are two lovely tanagers from the Pantanal, and of course, one of people's favorites to see is the scarlet-headed blackbird, and I mean you can see why with that luminous red head. Is just an amazing bird, and the Pantanal happens to be one of the best places to see it in the world. One thing I like on my tours is to highlight conservation stories. I believe it's very important as that we travel, that we are aware of the issues and that are facing the animals and plants that we're observing and documenting. And parrots are very, very dear to my heart. They're probably my favorite bird family, not probably, they are. And the Pantanal happens to be the best place in the world to see the largest flying parrot in the world, the spectacular Hyacinth macaw. Both of these taken at Porto Jofre, right in this little settlement there. They're feeding them, and they come down, and they're wild birds, but they're very tame. The Pantanal is the stronghold for the species after declining markedly for decades. The population has rebounded in the Pantanal through efforts with cattle ranchers, and there seems to be a good symbiosis working between cattle ranchers and macaws now. The birds were used to be caught for the pet trade, unfortunately. They serve a very important ecological function, as you can see this one eating. They feed on the nuts of the acuri palm, which grow in the Pantanal, and they put that bill to good use to open those nuts and then sort of manipulate them with their hands, their feet, but they use them like hands. And then, of course, I mean, the Pantanal is very birdy, but it's not just about birds. With such a productive ecosystem, the Pantanal is basically as close as you'll get to Africa while not being in Africa. For example, Brazilian tapir, largest land mammal in South America, giant otter, and giant anteater. Three amazing mammals. We also have a good chance of seeing capybara, the world's largest rodent. There's also marsh deer, which is the largest deer in South America. A lot of big things, lots of superlatives in the Pantanal. It's just a very productive ecosystem. And at South Wild Pantanal, they actually have an ocelot. So if we're lucky this year, The ocelot will still be coming in, and we might have a chance of seeing this marvelous medium-sized cat. And then, of course, you can't talk about the Pantanal without mentioning jaguars. What are the chances of seeing jaguars in the Pantanal? Very, very good. So from Porto Jofre, we spend a couple days exploring the river by boat. This is the only time in the tour that we spend a lot of boat time. And by going up and down by boat, we have very good chances of seeing jaguar. Everyone is interconnected all the local guides are interconnected by radio. And not only do we get to see jaguar, but we get to see behavior. So I've seen capybaras jaguars hunting capybaras. I've seen them just loafing. I've seen them swimming across the river. I've seen them hunting caiman. I've seen jaguars doing lots of really cool things. Another thing of note is that jaguars in the Pantanal actually are the heaviest. They actually have done studies on these jaguars, and they're actually the heaviest jaguars in the Americas are in the Pantanal. Very interesting. There's just a lot of food. Again, it's the productivity, this theme of there's a lot of food, there's a lot of nutrients going through this ecosystem. And so after we finish in the Pantanal, we continued to the forgotten grasslands of Brazil. And we do so via the small town of Chapada dos Guimaraes. So when I first came to Brazil, my first stop after renting a vehicle in Cuiabá was Chapada dos Guimaraes. So it was my real first experience of birding in Brazil. And actually I stayed at this very lodge, Posada do Parque, which has very, very good food, beautiful views. Chapada do Guimaraes, the national park, protects a lot of geologic features. It's very, very old, and these are very old weathered mountains. So here's another video. This was taken at Bridal Veil Falls, Vue de Noiva, and in the afternoon. I'm sorry for the haze from the fires. So the Cerrado features a lot of, at the end of the dry season, a lot of seasonal fires, because it's seasonal. A lot of it is seasonally dry forest. So there was a little bit of haze that day. So you can see here a bit of, this is called the forest type on the top of the plateau. It's called Campos Rupestre, which is basically a sort of a wooded savanna version of Cerrado. And the birds in the background that you're hearing, we were watching for red and green macaws and blue-winged macaws come to roost on that escarpment. And you could see a little bit of the waterfall. It's just a ribbon. And so Chapada dos Guimaraes features an interesting variety of birds. A lot of endemic birds live in the Cerrado. Unfortunately, I do not have a lot of good photos of them. There's many that I can name, white rump tanager being very memorable. These beautiful little tanagers that sort of duet at the top of these trees in this wooded savanna. There's cinnamon tanager and black-faced tanager. There's curl-crested jays. There's chaco. There's white-eared puffbird. No shortage of really interesting, really unique species, a completely different environment from anything else in South America. These are basically tropical savannas in South America, which have a very different character from the rainforest or from the Andes, further north and west. Here are some much more widespread species that I did manage to get a photo of. Still very beautiful. This is burnished buff tanager, rufous-tailed jacamar, it's very common, and golden green woodpecker. The golden green woodpecker was actually taken at May Bonifacia Park, right in the center of Cuiabá, which is a very large city, and it has a really, really wonderful park that protects a piece of Cerrado the Campos Rupestre. And yeah, these are some of the birds you would be able to see there. Another thing of note before I continue is there's also two other types of Cerrado. There's Cerrado Sujo, which is a more widely dispersed savanna with widely dispersed trees. And we do get to sample that in Chapada dos Guimaraes. We don't see Campo Sujo, Campo Limpo, I believe. And Campo Limpo is basically just pure grassland. And so around Posada do Parque, it's not as rich in mammals as the Pantanal, but there are a lot of these very adorable wild guinea pigs. These are Brazilian guinea pigs. So if you were curious to see what guinea pigs look like in their wild form, this is it. And so we say farewell. Here's some trip participants from a couple years ago. It's been a while. Hopefully, I'm very excited to be going back to Brazil. It's been a few years since COVID. Just had a really good time. And so, well, for questions.
Okay, Carlos, do you see those in the chat? If you can maybe start at the top of the
Okay,
question.
let me take a view. Okay. How physically difficult is it for us older folks? So the Pantanal area is very, very flat. It's very easy to do. I also believe the other parts of the trip are also quite easy. This isn't like Andean birding where you're working with high elevation and it's difficult to make mountainous countries flat. But in this case, I believe the Pantanal is actually very, very easy to do physically. The October trip is at the end of the dry season. How does that affect bird and wildlife viewing? So I have been there in October, and the bird and wildlife viewing is still excellent. You should be able to see pretty much everything. Pretty much everything will still be, you'll see most everything. There's a few things like Maguari storks, which are a bit seasonal. I've never seen them beyond July and August in the Pantanal, but pretty much everything else you have a really good chance of seeing. It might start raining towards the end, just a tad. You might get some rumbles. We did on the last October trip. If you're into plants, that's when things start flowering. And so I've documented some wild amaryllis. Wild amaryllis start to bloom at that time. in the drought last year, there were huge fires. How did the birds and jaguars fare? I don't know any specifics on how the birds and jaguars fared. I believe they probably fared pretty well. These are environments that are adapted to fire, unlike the Amazon rainforest, which is a completely different situation. Those are areas that should never burn. Do they eat cuy or guinea pig in Brazil? No, they don't. Brazilians do not eat guinea pig. The diet in Brazil is very different from, well, I believe all the South American countries have very different diets from each other, more or less. Brazil, they eat a lot of rice and beans, yes, but they also eat a lot of what they call farofa. So farofa is basically dried cassava. They love their protein, a lot of, in the interior, there'll be a lot of beef, chicken, and freshwater fish, especially sort of freshwater piranhas called pacu is very common, peacock bass, a lot of grilling, a lot of very simple seasoning. So if you're worried about things being spicy or things of that nature, you would not have to worry. So a little bit of, I heard that the Pantanal suffered bad wildfires 2 years ago. How extensive were the fires and is the burned area recovering? So a little bit of ecosystem 101. So some of the most resilient ecosystems in the world are freshwater wetlands. Freshwater wetlands are very resilient. They have the ability to recover very quickly. Unlike things like the Atlantic rainforest or the Amazon rainforest, which have very little ability to recover. There's just way too much complexity to restore in those situations. But wetland ecosystems can recover. I believe they should be doing okay, as long as it rains. Is there more rain in October than in the summer? There is a slightly larger probability of rain towards the end of October. Yes, it is possible, but you should still have a good time. Weather, if people are thinking about what the weather's like, July, August, September, very, very dry. It can be hot. However, on my first trip to Brazil, it was in 2013, there was a record snowfall in southern Brazil. I had only brought shorts and t-shirts and hiking, like hockey pants and things, thinking I was going to a tropical country. I was well inside the tropics. And lo and behold, I'm there in July and the high is like 55 degrees outside. And I was like, oh my God, I was just not expecting this. So, you know, if you're thinking about weather, dress for warmth, but bring a light sweater just in case. As they say in Spanish, it won't weigh down your luggage. Is most of the Pantanal protected? Most of the Pantanal is protected via private cattle ranchers. Does anyone else have any other questions? Guess not. Okay.
Thank you, Carlos. It was wonderful. I'm speaking for everyone and saying thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all for joining. It's fun just talking about Brazil and be getting excited about going back again after these years.
Okay.
Good to see you again, Carlos.
Likewise.
Oh, I see another question.
Oh, can you a range of temperatures? Generally you're going to be, I'd say about 60 degrees, 60, 65 degrees at night. going up to 80, 85 during the day. That would be the Pantanal portion. But again, I was there when there was a cold front that funneled air from Antarctica and it dropped. The high was in the upper 50s, and there was snow falling just south of Sao Paulo. So I would bring some clothing just in case for cooler weather.
We have an anteater
Likewise.
question.
Where else are you traveling? Right now, I have tours to towards the end of the year to Madagascar and to New Zealand. And next year, I have a tour going to Thailand. And of course, there's always my lovely Spain trip, probably my favorite trip. I have a lot of favorite trips, but Spain is definitely one of my favorites, if not my favorite. And hi, Harriet. It was nice to see you too. How
Carlos, we
likely is
had
an anteater sighting? It's pretty likely. At Posada Puval, they like the drier sort of environment. Pretty good chance of seeing giant anteater at Posada Puval. Does anyone else have any other questions? Don't worry, Laura. You'll have the checklist very soon. You always get the checklist weeks in advance. Don't worry. We'll get it to you.
Okay, thank you. I think we should wrap it up.
All right.
Thanks, folks.
Good night.
All right. Thank you all.
Good night, thanks.